Good afternoon. What a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Peter and Samreen. What a fantastic start. I've actually got 2 pages of notes that I need to take action on already. So I hope our listeners are writing down lots of ideas and thoughts about how they can actually take action. Because I always say the most important thing about these conferences is what you do afterwards. I'd like to really start with a story, if I may. And the first story really, which I'd like to share to you is a personal story. And it relates to my dad and my uncle. So I was very privileged to grow up in an environment which was really exciting as a young boy. The pictures, by the way, the guy on the motorbike is my dad, and the guy in the car is my uncle, Uncle Jeff. And as I grew up, I would support them and help them with their racing. And we'd go around the UK and sometimes into Europe, and we would actually sort of support them, help them with their racing. And on a Sunday evening, quite often, because they've been racing at different circuits around the UK and Europe, they would come back on a Sunday evening and do some reflection. So they'd stop and think about their racing, because obviously they had aspirations to win, of course. And what was very interesting as a young boy, I would listen to them intently around what they were doing and how they did it. And obviously I had aspirations myself to race. And it was very interesting over a period of time that a certain pattern came out of their conversations, which for me at the time, at 8 years old, I was struggling with. I couldn't understand what it really meant for me. But if I fast forward into my own career in racing, and very, very craftily, my mother steered me into racing cars. And you might notice actually the number 7 is quite prominent in all the cars I race now. So I've got seven minutes to share some concepts with you. But what I learned from my dad and my uncle was really, really powerful, was this: that every time they lost a race was because they were going too fast. And if I think about that in my own racing, and I think about some of the work that Samreen was talking there about our breath and how we can get hope in terms of our physiology and our biology in our bodies, I think that's very evident, because I certainly know from racing is that if I push too hard and I overthink and I try too hard, then often that's when I make mistakes. And that was the conversations that and the stories I was getting from my dad and my uncle, that they'd crash, or that something would break on the bike or the car, or they'd miss an apex, or they'd miss a gear, or something like that. And it's really the thing that came out of it was the fact that they were actually trying too hard and going too fast. So really, if I fast forward into my own career of not just racing, but also developing many leaders around the world, the question really is, how do we lead when the world is moving faster than our ability to keep up with it? And I think Samreen gave a fantastic introduction to that in terms of the pace of technology and how that's changing the way we actually lead. And I guess a lot of us rely on our recalled memory when we're leading and managing, when in fact we should be thinking maybe about the imagined future, and the fact that the world has changed so fast that actually we need to have some new rules to think about how we lead. And the challenge we have, of course, is that we're educated in a world that perhaps doesn't exist anymore. And we're all focused on this, delivering at pace, speeding up, and quite often we can find ourselves being really busy and what we call being on the hamster wheel. And I'm sure we can all relate to that. And it's often when we're really busy is when the mistakes get made. I mean, how many of us are in back-to-back meetings, which cannot really be effective when you stop and reflect on it? Example would be, how many of us actually been taught how to breathe correctly? If I go back to Samreen's presentation there. And we're not actually in the right state already to actually make great decisions and to be connected with our people. We run lots of leadership development programs over the years, and there is a definite common theme that's coming through. And if I look at a slide there of some of the clients that we're working with globally, the common theme is that we're all really busy. Something's happened. Things don't seem to be the same anymore. Something's changed. What I did a few years ago is not working anymore. We used to have long-term plans, and now we're almost like looking at strategy every 90 days. We're actually going to be more agile. So something's really changed. And I guess that change and that speed up of the context we're in actually is transferred to us as human beings. And we feel like we must be on this hamster wheel all the time and always connected, always busy, always doing things. And I think we can confuse being, I suppose, delivering at pace with being busy. And busy is I suppose, a contagious aspect that we have now. I guess if we were all to stop and breathe correctly, maybe we could actually slow the hamster wheel down and start to think in a more effective way. So what I'd like to share with you today really is a bit of hope, and to build on my learnings from my dad and my uncle around the ability to speed up by slowing down, and share with you some tactics, really, some things that we're in control of that we could actually do that would make a difference, which are really, really simple. And I guess, when you think about that breathing technique, which is a fantastic tool and technique that we can all build into our daily practice. And we often work with elite sports teams, and one of the things I noticed with them, they spend a lot of time in actually teaching athletes and teams how to breathe effectively, how to control their emotions, how to get in the right state and the right mindset to operate at high performance. Yet in business, we very rarely do that. We sometimes have a little bit of we'll throw a bit of magic dust on health and well-being, but we actually don't get down to the core of what's really important. So if I can take my learning from working with these organizations and think about some of the best leaders and managers I've seen around the world and what they're doing to change the way they operate, I think the first thing we need to do is perhaps unlearn some of the things that we've learned in the past. If I go back to my school days and I think about how I was educated, one of the things that I was taught is the fact that team working is actually cheating, because when I was at school, the teacher asked a question. If you knew the answer, you'd put your hand up and the teacher would tell you whether you're right or wrong. Now, I'm sure if I turn around and have a conversation and collaborated with my classmates, I'm sure the teacher would have told me off and sent me to the headmaster or some retribution, I guess, for actually, how dare you speak to other people? You've got to come up with the answer yourselves. And in fact, we're examined in that way as well. We're not examined in a team environment. So quite often we have a lot of these inbred mindsets, I guess, and experiences that form our recalled memory. And actually, we need to unlearn some of those and start to think perhaps in different ways. So I'd like to share with you really 7 tips from the field that I've suddenly learned that are all in our control that we can actually do. And the first thing really is really about the big picture. I think in a world where it's very ambiguous, we need to get clarity. And I think if I asked many managers, what's the strategy of the business, or what's our vision, or what's our goals or values, they struggle to articulate that. So our ability to be able to understand the big picture, understand why we're here, what we're here to achieve, where we want to get to, how we're going to get there, and how we should operate is really important, because when you have that in your mind, then it's a lot easier to actually prioritize, and you can actually slow down by doing the right things. The next thing really is about having a clear leadership discipline about understanding who you are, why you do, what you do, and how you do it, and actually articulating that in a way that is aligned to who you really are as a person. A lot of organizations now are moving away from detailed competency frameworks and starting to help leaders to craft a way of leading that works for their context and works for who they are as people. I guess we call that authentic leadership now, but being operating in a way that aligns to who you really are and the context you're in is really important, because that will enable you to be a lot more effective in your world. The next thing there is a military concept. My career started in the military, and we had a concept called taking a knee, which is really all about how you stop, think, and reflect when things are going wrong. It's just to stop and focus on what you're in control of, which is number 4. The next one really, and Peter talked about this in empowerment, and for me, empowerment needs direction, autonomy, and support. So it's not about abandonment, it's about giving people clear direction and then supporting them and enabling them to be effective. And building this mindset of stop, think, do, and learn. I think the way that we get off the hamster wheel is just to stop and think and reflect and learn. So we used to use a concept called after action reviews a lot in the military. And the final thing I'd like to share with you is to know your critical moments. And I've finished on that point there, because I think that is the key thing for me. Is a lot of people haven't worked out what is critical for their success. And once you find out what's critical for success, you can stop and slow down and make sure that you're on your A game, ready to perform at the highest level when it really matters. And my final thought for you to think through in terms of this concept, which was built into us in our military training, is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So we don't have to increase our pace. We can actually slow down to be more effective. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Graham. That's a great message for the busy leaders who inevitably, somehow people have this thing that says, if I'm busy, therefore I'm important.
Absolutely.
And yet leaders are supposed to stop and think strategically. And how can you do that when you've got meetings every minute, and you've got people standing outside your office and a long queue of people wanting to talk to you, and an email in tray of 500 emails, being able to step back and stop and think. I always think that very often, we talking to the military, you say ready, aim, fire. So
Absolutely.
often leaders are ready, fire, aim, because they're too busy pressing the trigger to stop and think of what they're aiming at.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a great message. So thank you very much, Graham. You and Sam Marine have certainly got us off to a good, hopeful start.